Okay, I think we can safely get going here. It's a couple minutes after 2. My name is George Bodarky. I'm the news director of WFUV-FM in New York City. I'm also the training committee chair for public radio news directors. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest webinar, Lead Writing 101. Let me tell you about our educator today. She is Judith Smeltzer. Judith is the news director at WMFD in Orlando, a position she's held since 2007. She joined WMFD as a reporter back in 2004. Her stories have aired on NPR, Marketplace, The World, and on public stations across Florida. Before moving to the Sunshine State, Judith worked in Washington, D.C. as a radio and television reporter for Feature Story News, that's an independent broadcast news agency. She reported for the agency's many public radio clients, including serving as a congressional correspondent for New Hampshire Public Radio. She also did time as an editor for the agency's fast-paced newscast feed service, which is where she learned to write strong leads, and probably why she's so excited about the topic that we are going to approach today. And let me add that Judith has won numerous awards, including Florida AP Awards for light and hard feature reporting and public affairs and continuing coverage. So, Judith, thank you so much for taking the time. And I know you want to preface all of this with, we may have a tornado, and hopefully I can stick through this entire webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, George, and thanks for all of you for joining me and for joining us on this webinar. Yeah, we have some really crazy weather going on here in Florida today, and I've got some of my coworkers who are on the webinar, but also having one eye on what's going on and with instructions to come and wave at me if things get too crazy. But I'm hoping that the worst of it is over, and that hopefully we'll be able to complete all of this in good time. So thanks
Judith,
again.
Let me just point out real quick, if anyone has a question, use the question box on your control panel, and we'll hopefully get all of your questions answered by the time we're through. So Judith, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to pause for questions at the end, but if at any point you have a comment or think something I've said is completely wrong and want to disagree, just go ahead and type that in, and George will interrupt me, and we'll go from there. So basically, this is my first webinar leading experience, and I have to tell you it's a little bit disconcerting not to be able to see all of you, but I'm just going to assume that you're all nodding and smiling and laughing at all my jokes, so that'll be just great. And I also want to say that I don't want to set myself up as the end-all be-all expert guru on lead writing. I'm sure everybody has their own ideas, and I've certainly talked to a number of people in preparing this presentation, and I want to say a special thanks, even though he's not on the call, obviously, to Rob Schaefer up at NPR Newscast. I ran a lot of my ideas by him, and he solicited some advice from his coworkers as well. So, and also other folks from around the system who contributed some sample leads and ideas. So, thanks to all of you guys, and hopefully we'll all learn something together. So, lead writing is something that is a pet subject of mine. I think it's very important. It often gets overlooked because we're so anxious to get to the script. But the reason that it matters is it doesn't matter what you say if nobody's listening. And the lead is what obviously gets people to listen to your story. And that's why we're talking about this today. So I'm going to mainly focus on newscast spot leads, because I think that, that's a lot of talk about things that get ignored a lot, but things that are very important. Writing leads for newscast spots is one of those big topics. So it needs to contain the latest action, obviously, on a story. It needs to include the crux of the story. It has to answer at least one and probably more of the major questions: who, what, where, when, how, and why. And it needs to tell the listener why he or she should care. Why should they listen to the rest of this story? Why is it important? And so the things that we're going to talk about today are hopefully going to accomplish those goals. Some few basic rules for lead writing, and then we're going to go through some examples that sort of exemplify each of these things. Be active. Don't bury the lead. Obviously, a big cliche, but definitely important. Be selfless, and I will explain what I mean by that going forward. Be brief. Be specific. Beware of wordy titles, and avoid cliches like bury the lead, but I get a pass on that, I think. Be active. So always write an active voice. You want to say that someone is doing something, not that someone is having something done to them. And I think you editors, if you're editors out there as well as reporters, there are many times that we get leads where some that are written in a passive voice, and that's just makes it sound less important, and we want it to sound important. So here's an example of that. A bill outlawing corporal punishment was passed by the legislature today. By something is a warning word, I think. By the legislature, something being done by something. I think if you find yourself writing the word by in a lead, you need to ask yourself if you're maybe possibly putting this in passive voice. What you want to say is, the legislature voted to outlaw corporal punishment today. Something doing something. Maybe even better, lawmakers voted to outlaw corporal punishment today. Then generally you want to talk about people doing something actively in the first line of your lead. Don't bury the lead, and I'm also putting that under the category of being active because I think that it all kind of comes under the same category. We usually tell a story chronologically. Once upon a time, something happened many years ago, and then this happened, and then that happened, and that happened. That's how we talk in sort of normal everyday parlance, but that's usually not the way to write a newscast lead. You want to start, so it's sort of counterintuitive, and I think that's why a lot of people have challenges with this. So here's an example of this. Last week, the governor said he wanted to cut the budget, but now he's proposing a $3 million plan to crack down on drug dealers. Obviously, if you're telling people that over a coffee, then maybe that's how you would tell that story. But last week is a big warning sign. If you ever find yourself writing last week, last month in a lead, you want to ask yourself a question. Wow, am I really writing this correctly? You want to start with what happened today. The governor announced a $3 million plan to crack down on drug dealers today. The proposal comes just days after he promised to make big cuts in the state budget. So you put the background in the second line, generally the best plan. Here's another example. Florida's citrus growers are assessing the damage from 2 nights of sub-freezing temperatures across the peninsula. They say there was some frozen fruit, but it's too early to know what the impact will be to the state's $9 billion a year citrus industry. A warning sign here in this one is still assessing. If they're still doing something, why are we reporting this in a newscast? It's supposed to be what happened, what's the latest action. So what's happening now is Florida citrus growers report some frozen oranges in their groves. But they say it's too early to know the full impact of this week's sub-freezing temperatures. Obviously, the idea is put the latest thing in the top. That's what people want to know first. Be selfless. This is the second rule. So resist the temptation to save the best part of the story for yourself. This goes for whether you're writing a newscast lead or a feature lead. This is often, we're very selfish as reporters, and we want to say the cool stuff. But really, you want people, again, to know why they should listen to this story. And if you hold too much back, people may not really get the idea of that. So here's an example, and I'm using Disney World because everybody thinks the only thing in Orlando is Disney World, right? So thousands of visitors to Walt Disney World ride the monorail every day. Yesterday, many of them got a big shock, as Jane Doe reports. Well, that doesn't really tell us anything, does it? But this does. 2 monorail trains crashed into each other at Walt Disney World yesterday. Wow. That's a story I want to pay attention to, isn't it? And so, actually you're helping yourself out as the reporter because people are now going to be listening to what you have to say when the anchor shuts up and you start talking. So that's being selfless. Being brief is kind of the flip side of being selfless. Don't make the anchor tell the whole story. If you write too much, you're going to get yourself in trouble because, again, and this is a contribution as well that folks at NPR Newscast brought up, no anchor should have to read a lead cold, obviously. They should have had time to look over it. But every now and then, things get crazy in all of our newsrooms, and so sometimes they do have to. Your lead should be easy to read on the fly. So that means write in short, complete sentences, no complex or compound sentences. Don't run your anchor out of breath. Trying to read your lead. So here's an example of a long lead. A crowd of potential Republican contenders for Democrat Joe Smith's U.S. Senate seat is already shaping up, and among them are 2 current congressmen and 2 state lawmakers. But a recent poll shows none of them has what it takes yet to unseat Smith. Instead, as Jane Doe reports, the one person who could do it is a former governor. Wow, I'm out of breath already, right? And you've basically told most of the story. Of course, this is also an example of burying the lead. You're trying to save this for yourself and being selfish. Oh, who's this former governor? But really, Here's what you need to say. A new poll shows former Florida Governor Jeb Bush is the only person who can unseat Democratic U.S. Senator Joe Smith in next year's election. That's the story. The survey suggests none of the Republicans currently in the race have enough support to win. And then the details about who these contenders are, the two state lawmakers and the two current congressmen, that can go in your body, in the body of your piece. So you've basically told people, here's what the story is, and then you can give the details later. And obviously, you've not made your host or your anchor have to read too much or for too long. Be specific. Here is something that I think many of you editors out there will be able to identify with, and probably most of you reporters as well. A meeting happened today. Okay, let's face it, that's boring. It really is. Something was accomplished at the meeting, that might be interesting. And if nothing happened, you probably don't need to report it anyway. So if the school board held a meeting but nothing happened, really let's not bother with it, right? Here's an example. A local education task force held its monthly meeting in Boring City today. Well, this is much more interesting, isn't it? A local education task force says Boring City should close 10 elementary schools to save money. Again, it may be the sort of thing where you think that you need to hold that back for yourself to say in the body of the piece. But my answer to that would probably be, if that's all there is to say, then maybe it should be a reader and it shouldn't be a spot or a voicer or a longer piece. You know, there should be some more meaty background. You know, maybe there's been some controversy about this, whatever there is, and you can give all of that in the body of your piece. But you need to tell listeners right up front, this is why I should care, because there's 10 elementary schools that could be closed in Boring City. So here's another example. The Census Bureau announced new population numbers today. That's kind of boring, right? But Florida will gain 2 congressional seats because of new census numbers released today. Wow, now that's something I want to listen to, isn't it? So that's the being specific. Beware of wordy titles. This is self-explanatory. Indeed, it is. But while it's self-explanatory, it's a trap that we often fall into because we feel like, okay, we need to give this person his full title, or we feel somehow obligated to give the full name of a committee. Again, think about it from the listener's point of view. Does the listener really care that the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Food Safety at the State Department of Health testified before the House Subcommittee on Agricultural and Consumer Affairs today? Again, wow, I'm out of breath. And I'm asleep if I'm the listener. I don't care about all of these titles, and I've gotten lost. Also, you really haven't told me anything. You're not being specific. Here, the state health department's top food safety official told lawmakers today that spinach may not be safe to eat. You know, you've actually, in shortening up these titles, given yourself time to tell us what the story is and to tell us why we should care. And I guarantee you people are going to be much more interested in hearing that story than they are going to be interested in hearing the previous story. So avoid cliches. This is a special plea from NPR Newscast. I got this whole list of things from Rob, and I could almost feel the frustration coming down the phone line at me. So I would just read through these with you here. The upper hand. When firefighters start getting control of a fire, they don't always gain the upper hand. Let's try to find something else to say. No stranger to trouble is so-and-so. Someone's in trouble with the law again. We don't want to say that. This is one of my favorites. Little Johnny Smith. Yeah, please let's not say that. Took to the streets for protests and rallies. The big dance, the NCAA men's basketball tournament, obviously a very current complaint for folks. A robbery gone bad. When is a robbery good? Yeah, good point. As expected. If it was expected, why are you reporting it? These are obviously things that we can include not just in talking about leads, but in talking about good writing in general. And I did try to focus here on lead-specific things, but I think these cliches are worth thinking about as well. A few other details. Facts that can change should usually go into the lead just in case. Examples, obviously, number of dead and injured, number of customers without power, which is particularly relevant for me today here in our stormy weather. Hopefully not the dead and injured, but at least the customers without power.